I reckon it was the scent that stirred it first. The faint, sweet, sad perfume of roses drifting through my screen door this morning, like someone whispered 1991 right into my kitchen. One breath, and I was back there, 24 and motherless, staring at embers that had taken everything but my heartbeat. Funny how a smell can snatch the years off your bones quicker than any photograph. The clock on the wall hummed, and the kettle rattled its little tune. And before I knew it, my thumb was grazing the silver crack along that old china vase, the very one that's held a decade's worth of secrets and long-stemmed lies. Now, sugar, if this tale already tickles your own memories, would you be a dear and tap that friendly thumb below? Maybe jot me a line so I know you're sitting with me? It keeps an old gal company on a rainy afternoon, bless your heart. Anyhow, it's Maybelle Jane McKinney talking. 60-something summers to my name, though the mirror insists on counting each winter too. Folks around Cedar Hollow say I've got a patient smile and a porch that never judges. Truth is, that porch has heard more confessions than a church pew, mine most of all. Today, I'm sharing the one story I've tucked behind hymns and polite nods for near on 30 years. The story that still rattles my teacup even when the house is quiet. See, every July 9th, I used to wake to roses on the table. Velvety red, dew-kissed, arranged just so by my husband Richard, who claimed he could never remember birthdays but somehow never forgot the day the fire took Mama. He'd set 'em down gentle as a prayer, kiss my forehead, and we'd pretend the world was kind. Back then I believed a well-timed bloom could mend anything. Lord, how I wanted to believe. Richard was 10 years older, tall as a pine and just as steady, the new manager at the mill when he wandered into our library asking about Georgia history like he was auditioning for a part he'd already memorized. I fell for that slow grin, the way he stirred my coffee before handing it over, as if he'd studied the swirl of my spoon. Only later did I learn he'd been studying far more. But I'm galloping ahead of myself, and Daddy always said good stories walk. They don't sprint. What woke me proper this morning was the drizzle tapping the tin roof. Same rhythm that pattered the night Mama's house burned. Same rhythm that followed me out to the porch in 2006 when Richard's heart quit without warning. That was the afternoon the vase slipped from my hands and cracked open like a confession worth 20 years in penance. Inside, folded small and wrapped in foil, waited Mama's last words, a warning, a dying daughter's plea. Sometimes I swear I can still feel the paper soften against my fingertips, words bleeding through like fresh ink. If he finds you, don't trust. He remembers dates. He never gives without reason. I didn't scream, didn't even sob at first. I simply sat amid porcelain shards while the roses, his final batch, sagged around me. You'd think truth breaking wide open would roar like thunder, but for me, it whispered, gentle as a lullaby, and that quiet tore deeper than any howl. Why share this now? Because secrets age worse than people do. I've got a granddaughter scribbling questions for a school project, hungry for real stories, and I reckon the most real thing I own is the space between the roses Richard offered and the flames he fed before he ever met me. So pull your chair closer, feel the wood creak, let the rain be our metronome. I promise not to flinch from the shadows, or the foolish part of me that still misses the man I thought he was. Tell me, friend, have you ever loved someone so much that even their lies grew roots in your heart? Think on that while the kettle finishes its song, and if you figure an answer, don't leave me waiting alone. I grew up just a mile east of Cedar Hollow, Georgia, tucked between cornfields and whispering pines that reached so high I fancied the good Lord stashed spare stars in their branches. Summer air tasted of honeysuckle and red clay, and Mama's wind chimes kept steadier time than any clock. Folks claim small towns move slow, but ours drifted downright drowsy. Mondays were quilting circles, Saturdays sweeping dust off the porch, and every Sunday after church, Daddy tuned the Philco to gospel. I was Maybelle Jane then, skinny knees, moon-white socks, ponytail bouncing with more faith in tomorrow than sense. My world stretched from the Tadpole Creek to Mr. Lyle's hardware, and I walked it barefoot, believing dirt taught courage. Mama kept lilies out front, though they never survived August. She'd hum "I'll Fly Away," saying blossoms return if you love them honest. On Friday nights, the whole town crowded the high school gym for penny bingo, and I'd perch cross-legged beside Mama counting nickels, convinced riches grew straight out of laughter, and that every shout of bingo blessed the roof. She filed attendance at school by day and told stories by sunset, shelling butter beans while the yard turned violet. Daddy was steady as the kitchen table he built, teaching sums with pop bottles and mercy by never cursing the heat. Evenings, lightning bugs lit the grass like slow sparks, and Mama handed me a mason jar, but only for a minute. Let them get on home, baby girl. Back then I thought kindness was law, and people, like moths, always circled back to light. My dream was modest: teach school, ride the train to Atlanta once, and save enough nickels to buy Mama a real crystal vase. I didn't know yet that years can pivot on nights you sleep straight through, or that a heart has poor manners about checking references. Before the fire lands of 91, my worries fit in a shoebox: spelling tests, church solos, whether Johnny Harper would notice my ribbon. The day Mama died, I was 24, shelving returns at the library, but parts of me were still barefoot in that yard, trusting thunder to stay polite. Sometimes I replay our final breakfast: coffee stout, biscuit steaming, sunlight pouring syrupy gold across the table. She squeezed my wrist, said I'd make a fine teacher yet, her eyes holding a promise I was too busy to unwrap. I left with a wave, figuring promises keep themselves. That night the siren wailed, first distant, then personal, turning Cedar Hollow's hush into a mouthful of smoke. The paper blamed faulty wiring, a phrase that never settled in my chest. Rumors scuttled like June bugs, locked door, scratch marks, a scream no one reached in time. I spent weeks on Daddy's porch, staring at charred timber stacked like unanswered questions, telling myself faith was still faith, even when it trembled. Yet a seed of dread sprouted, roots curling around every memory I owned. I remember thinking, if Mama could vanish between supper and sunrise, nothing in this world wore a seatbelt. But even then I clung to her lesson: love things honest and they'll return. So I kept loving, stubborn as a weed, believing storms had curfews and sunrises never reneged. It took 2 years and a borrowed library ladder for Richard to stroll into my story. Tie loosened, smile rehearsed, asking after books he didn't need. I thought fate had finally circled back, gentle and good. Had I known fate sometimes borrows the voice of wildfire, I might have run, but that wisdom was still unborn, napping beneath embers I refused to sift through. It happened on an unassuming Tuesday in late September of '93, when the sun lounged low and lazy through the courthouse oaks, and I, still carrying fresh grief like a song stuck in the throat, was up a wobbling ladder in the Cedar Hollow Library, dusting top-shelf volumes nobody but time itself had touched. From that high perch I heard the doorbell jingle and a baritone hum float in, rich and easy, almost playful, as though someone had rehearsed the exact pitch to slip past my guard. Down below stood Richard Everett Dawson, sleeves rolled, tie loosened just enough to prove he worked for a living, yet didn't mind pausing for wonder. His eyes were the color of creek stones after rain, calm but hiding currents, and when he craned his neck to meet mine, Lord help me, the latter might as well have vanished, for my knees forgot every rule of gravity. "Pardon, ma'am," he called, hat pressed polite to his chest. "Reckon you could point a newcomer toward the history of Georgia? I'm told you hold the finest collection this side of Macon." My first thought, silly and bright as a firefly, Was Mama bragging from heaven that her girl kept a respectable library? My second, quicker and harder, was a pang that he'd used the word newcomer, reminding me how towns like ours weigh strangers with both curiosity and caution. Still, something gentle flickered in his grin, that sort of Sunday school patience Daddy used when teaching long division. And before I could hush my pulse, I was climbing down, rung by careful rung, dust motes swirling like confetti at a fair. Up close, he smelled of cedar shavings and fresh coffee, the pot I hadn't brewed yet somehow already living on his collar. I guided him to the local history alcove, fingers brushing titles while he pretended to read spines, though I swear his gaze held steadier on my hands than any gilded lettering. "I'm overseeing the mill now," he said. "Figured knowing the land's stories helps a man respect its timber." That line landed smooth, rehearsed maybe, but clever enough to earn a smile, and I thought, well, sugar, not every day does sorrow pause to make room for charm. He listened when I spoke of early settlers and pine tar roots, nodding as if my every word ticked some inner metronome, and I felt the hum of being observed not for brokenness, but for brightness, a feeling I hadn't worn since before the fire stole Mama. The longer we lingered amid those quiet stacks, the more the room itself seemed to breathe along, offering pages like hands eager to bless. When he finally checked out a thin county chronicle, one I doubted he truly needed, he tipped his hat and asked if I knew a diner that served honest peach pie. My heart, traitor that it was, leapt clear through the grief cloud and perched on possibility. Still, I answered with practiced modesty, pointing him to Miss Odell's down on River Street. He left with a promise to return the book and, if I was partial, bring a slice for my trouble. As he stepped into the afternoon glow, something fluttered against the library window, a monarch butterfly, bold and lone, beating wings where glass said no, and I felt an echo inside myself, a gentle insistence that maybe, just maybe, life wasn't finished surprising me. I couldn't have named the tug then, call it destiny, call it danger wearing Sunday shoes, but my pulse stuttered the way it did as a girl awaiting the fair's first carousel whirl. That night, while cicadas drummed and the house creaked with memories of Mama, I lay awake replaying his smile until it overlapped with every prayer I'd whispered into my pillow. The prayer to feel chosen, the prayer to feel safe, the prayer to believe kindness still circled back like migrating geese. I didn't yet know kindness can borrow a fox's coat, nor that a man crisp in manners might carry tinder in his pocket, but a seed had been planted, one that would grow, twist, and bloom 1,000 red petals on the anniversary of a fire I'd never forget. And so, a single request for Georgia history became the hinge on which my whole world swung, quietly, irrevocably, toward a future both fragrant and fatal. I wish I could tell you the stroll from that first smile to steady bliss was straight as a church aisle, but honey, life zigzags even when you hold the map upside right. Not 2 months after Richard started courting, bringing peach pie on Tuesdays, fishing stories on Fridays, the hush-hush of Cedar Hollow turned sharp. Miss Lottie from the quilting circle cornered me by the post office, voice syrup thick yet cutting, asking if I truly knew where that millman hailed from, seeing as no kin ever visited, and his answers shifted like sand. Daddy, loyal but cautious, invited Richard for supper and spent the evening studying him over mashed potatoes, fingers drumming the table in time with his doubts. I caught Daddy later on the porch, staring past the pines, whispering he'd seen men who smiled that easy during his army days, men who kept their secrets holstered. Those words rattled my ribcage, but pride is stubborn. I told Daddy love can start fresh and some secrets are just old scars. Trouble is, once a seed of worry's planted, it sprouts in the dark. I began waking at dawn to tighten every window latch, though I couldn't have named the fear proper, just felt it pacing under my skin like a hound scenting storm. One foggy morning, The library announced budget cuts. Half the staff let go, hours slashed, which meant I'd be idle 3 afternoons a week. Richard saw opportunity in the loss, saying, "Come ride with me to Macon, darling. See the bigger world." I wanted to say yes. His voice poured confidence like warm milk, but a knot pulled tight. Mama's house still smelled of soot and memory, and leaving Cedar Hollow felt akin to abandoning her ashes. Richard pressed, gently at first, then with a firmness that bruised. "You can't let grief chain you forever," he said after church one Sunday, shadows of stained glass coloring his jaw. I heard sense in those words, yet also heard a tap-tap at the door of my autonomy, and pride flared hot. That night, I stood in my childhood bedroom, walls still papered with daisies, ashamed for doubting a man who merely wished to share horizons, yet angry he'd call my morning chains. I thought of Mama's hands smoothing bedspreads, her voice telling me love never hurries what's healing. The conflict set up camp inside me, half craving the adventure Richard promised, half clinging to the town that raised me and the grave that tethered my heart. Meanwhile, gossip brewed thicker. Wiley Carter claimed he saw Richard arguing with a drifter behind the mill, money-changing palms. Sheriff Dukes shrugged it off. No law against harsh words, but whispers grew teeth. I asked Richard straight out, and he laughed soft, said folks invent stories when they're bored, tugged me close, scent of cedar muting my doubt. Yet that night I dreamt flames licking Mama's curtains. Only this time, a tall silhouette stood beyond the window, turning away before I could scream. I woke sweaty, ashamed my own mind would sow suspicion onto the coat of a man who never raised his voice. Still, every new kindness of his, fixing Daddy's porch rail, gifting me a locket, felt both balm and burden, as though gratitude chained me to acceptance. Daddy's health dipped after a winter flu. He couldn't spar with my decisions the way he once did, and I felt the world tilting, responsibilities shifting onto my young shoulders. In that hush, I agreed to a spring engagement, though a whisper inside asked whether I was moving forward or merely being moved. Richard kissed the ring onto my finger beneath the dogwood in bloom, the scent mingling sweet with a faint, unnameable dread. I smiled for photographs, yet late at night pressed the cool gold against my lips, praying for Mama's counsel, tasting salt I pretended was joy. That was the season my routine cracked. Job halved, heart halved, future expanding faster than my courage, and beneath every decision lay the unspoken question: was I honoring love or escaping loneliness? Back then, I couldn't voice the fear. I only nodded, smiled, folded it small, and tucked it where grief had once slept, never guessing how soon the two would share a bed. July 9th of '06 dawned muggy, the kind of southern heat that wilts resolve before noon. Yet I remember the morning air inside our kitchen feeling oddly crisp, like the world had taken one sharp breath and was waiting to exhale. Richard stood by the stove humming Amazing Grace, sleeves rolled neat, brewing coffee just how I liked, 2 spoons of chicory, a wink of sugar. He turned, smile bright as ever, set a single biscuit on my plate, then pressed his palm to his chest as though a fly had landed beneath the skin. In the same moment, the wall clock's second hand gave a hiccup, and, in my memory, never moved again. His face drained, coffee splashing across the linoleum, while I caught him clumsy, knuckles grazing hot porcelain. "May," was all he managed before sliding to the floor, breath rattling like loose gravel in a jar. I dialed for help with fingers suddenly foreign, the receiver slick from sweat or tears. I couldn't tell which, my own pulse banging louder than the siren that carved through town minutes later. Paramedics worked him in the ambulance driveway, their voices calm but curt. I sat on the porch steps clutching his wedding band, slipped off so they could shock his heart, the gold warm as if it still belonged. At the hospital, fluorescent light made everything look borrowed. His skin, the sterile sheets, even my hope. Until a doctor shaped his lips around sorry, and I understood the rest of my life had begun without permission. Hours later, I walked into a house that felt borrowed too. Grief has a way of making door frames unfamiliar. The roses he always brought on Mama's death day had not arrived. The vase on the mantel yawning empty, dusty, almost reproachful. On instinct, I fetched it down, meaning to rinse last year's residue, when fate's clumsy elbow nudged me. The vase slipped, shattered against hardwood with a sound like brittle bone. Shards fanned out across the floor, and from the hollow center slid a small foil bundle, tarnished yet deliberate. I knelt, breath snagged, peeled the foil like skin from a fruit, revealing a creased envelope marked in Mama's hurried script, for Maybelle, if ever found. Lightning cracked somewhere distant, maybe only in my chest, while I broke the seal and unfolded the note that would unmake a decade. Mama's words were shaky but fierce. His name is Richard. He said he loved me, then locked the door from the outside. I smell smoke already. If he reaches you, trust nothing. He remembers dates. He gives only with reason. I read it twice, thrice, until ink blurred, the paper damp where tears met sweat. Slowly, I realized the scent filling my nostrils was not roses, but sublimated smoke from 15 years ago, curling phantom fingers around my throat. Every kindness Richard ever offered, coffee stirred, porch rail mended, 10 years of birthday candles, flipped like coins to reveal the same charred face underneath. And I tasted betrayal so pure, it scalded. I didn't scream. Sound felt too small for what split open inside. Instead, I sat amid porcelain ruins, letter fluttering against my knee, and listened to silence learn a new weight. In that suspension, I lost more than a husband. I forfeited the safe narrative I'd stitched to survive, the belief that love could outshine unanswered questions. The woman who rose from that floor was not the bride who once trusted a stranger in a library. She carried ash where innocence had nested, and her heart, though still beating, kept a ledger of smoke. Somewhere a phone rang, friends checking on the widow, unaware she'd buried two loves in one day. But I let it cry unanswered. My first act as a woman remade by truth was to line up the shards of the vase like puzzle pieces, because even broken things deserve witness, and I reckoned so did I. The weeks that followed were a long, pale hush, as though someone had thrown a quilt over the town's bells and told time to mind its manners. Sunrise came, but the colors seemed wrung out, and every room in the house echoed differently, like even the chairs were too polite to scrape the floor without Richard's permission. I swept up the last slivers of the vase and tucked the letter in Mama's Bible, then found myself wandering from window to window, searching for proof the outside world still moved. Delivery trucks rattling past, Mrs. Shearer clipping her roses, the high school band blaring off-key marches. Simple things I'd never noticed were lifelines. Grief after my husband's death had been expected. The betrayal hitchhiking inside it was the surprise, and the two sorrows quarreled so loudly in my chest I could hardly hear my own name. I tried to read scripture, but the words floated like dust above the page, refusing to settle. I tried to pray, yet every pluff felt stuck halfway to heaven, as though Mama herself were blocking the line till I faced the truth square. So I did what Southern women do when the world shifts. I baked. Pies, biscuits, peach preserves, batch after batch, letting dough absorb questions my voice wouldn't shape. I delivered tins to neighbors who eyed me with the soft pity reserved for fresh widows, unaware they were tasting apologies I owed myself. Evenings, I rocked on the porch, the swing creaking in place of conversation, and watched fireflies stitch yellow ribbons through the dusk. Somewhere in that quiet, I realized I no longer feared darkness. What rattled me was the thought of light exposing one more lie. The sheriff's office filed Mama's note with a sigh and a stamp. Insufficient evidence. Their faces kind but finished. Closure, I learned, is a word folks use when they've stopped looking, not when a mystery's solved. My faith in people didn't break so much as molt. The fragile shell fell away, and what emerged was leaner, wary, but still reaching for warmth, because trust, once woven into bone, doesn't vanish, it just rehearses new caution. I sold Richard's truck, boxed his clothes, and donated every red-petaled thing, tablecloths, neckties, garden shears painted cherry, unable to bear the color that once meant devotion. I kept the empty vase, cracks glued, seams visible, a reminder that a vessel can hold history without hiding it. Some nights I woke sweating. Sure, I smelled smoke, and I'd pad barefoot to the kitchen, palms flat against cool tile, whispering, "It's the past, baby girl, only the past," until the house exhaled. In the slow rhythm of chores, I found a sliver of steadiness. Shelves needed dusting, tomatoes needed canning, and the sparrows outside still fussed at dawn regardless of human deceit. I wasn't the Maybelle who believed kindness was law, but neither was I stone. I was a field after harvest, stripped yet fertile, waiting to choose what seeds to trust again. The hardest part was meeting my own gaze in the mirror, seeing the woman who had loved a killer and still missed the way he said good morning. So I left a note taped beside the glass. Mercy starts here. Day by day I practiced it, first on my reflection, then on strangers at the market, and eventually on the memory of Richard himself. Not forgiveness, perhaps, but a ceasefire so my heart could unclench enough to keep beating. By the time my granddaughter knocked with her school project, the hush inside me had thinned to a manageable whisper. I poured sweet tea, stroked the vase's scarred side, and knew that telling the story would hurt. But silence had hurt worse. Somewhere between polishing the last jar of summer preserves and mending a tear in my porch cushion, a small envelope arrived from my granddaughter. Lilac stationery, tidy handwriting, bright enough to tilt the room toward spring. She wrote that her civics teacher had assigned a living history film, and would I please share stories only Grandma Maybelle could tell. That simple ask, tucked among grocery flyers, felt like a hand reaching through the years, offering purpose I hadn't petitioned for, but surely needed. I brewed a fresh pot of chicory, set 2 teacups though only one seat was filled, and read her letter thrice, each time feeling the faint stir of an engine long left idle. The notion that my battered memories might teach, might safeguard someone else, pried open a window I nailed shut after Richard's secrets bled the daylight out. Next morning I walked to the library, same aisles, same dust dancing in the sun, and asked Mrs. Denton if the Children's Corner still hosted Saturday read-alouds. Her face lit like porch lights at dusk, and before my courage could retreat, she penciled my name onto the volunteer ledger. First session, I stumbled over the cadence of Charlotte's Web, voice rusty, palms damp, but when a wide-eyed boy gasped at the word terrific spun in silk, something warm sparked where grief once camped. Week by week I found rhythm again, stories spilling from me, laughter echoing where silence had ruled. I started a memory box craft, shoe boxes wrapped in butcher paper, each child encouraged to stash letters or trinkets they might treasure later. Watching little hands tuck secrets away without fear mended a sliver inside me. Perhaps I mused, the ache of hidden truths is eased when we teach the young to save joys openly. One breezy afternoon, the town council announced a community garden behind the old courthouse, and for reasons I didn't analyze, I volunteered to tend the rose bed. The first time my trowel struck dirt, the scent of new earth rose like a hymn, and I pressed a single yellow tea rose cutting, Mama's favorite, into the soil. Kneeling there, I whispered that truth belongs in daylight, not double-bottom vases, and felt the world agree in birdsong. Even Sheriff Dukes paused while passing, tipping his hat as though the act itself absolved old failures. I responded with a nod that held neither blame nor blessing, just acknowledgement we both carried scars. Gradually, neighbors who once spoke in soft pity began greeting me with invitations. Bake sale, hymn sing, quilt raffle, and I accepted because saying yes felt like practice for living forward. Hope, I discovered, isn't a trumpet blast, but a steady hum beneath chores. The kettle whistling, the soil breathing, a child's laugh ricocheting off library walls. Nights, when the porch swing swayed beneath a quilt of cricket song, I still heard the distant hiss of memory's fire, but it no longer chased sleep away. Instead, it reminded me vigilance and vitality can share the same heart. The yellow rosebush took root quicker than expected, and the day its first bloom unfurled, I clipped it, carried it home, and slipped it into the mended vase, not to hide, but to honor. Staring at that honest blossom, I realized my second chance wasn't some grand reinvention. It was the quiet right to choose what I would carry forward and whom I'd invite to walk beside me. So when my granddaughter finally arrived, camera shaking in youthful excitement, I welcomed her onto the porch swing, poured 2 glasses of sweet tea, and felt a gentle certainty settle. The story I feared would destroy her innocence might instead plant discernment, much like that rose, thorned, yes, but vibrant. And for the first time in years, the horizon looked less like a line of caution tape and more like an open road waiting on sunrise. The night before my granddaughter hit record for good, I found myself alone in the kitchen, Dawn still hiding, letter from Mama spread on the table like a fragile map of all I once refused to navigate. The paper, softened by years of rereading, fluttered under the breeze of an open window, and I knew the time had come to decide whether those last words would anchor me forever or finally set me afloat. All summer, I had trimmed roses for the community garden, watched children chase butterflies between sweet pea rows, told library stories that ended with courage triumphant, and yet each evening that folded page pulled me backward, whispering, "You loved a killer, you never saw the flames." I poured a measure of chicory, steadying my hands, and listened to the house breathe, older now, but still able to hold me without judgment. With one deep sigh, I understood the difference between remembering and reliving. Remembering invites wisdom, reliving shackles hope. So I folded Mama's letter once more, slid it into a canning jar, screwed the lid tight, and carried it to the flower bed where the first flush of yellow roses had begun to fade. Kneeling in damp soil, I dug a shallow cradle, not to bury truth, but to plant it where roots of honesty already thrummed. I pressed the jar into earth, covered it gently, and patted the mound as if tucking a child to sleep. "You warned me, Mama," I whispered, tears slipping onto my wrist, "and I finally heard every word. Now rest." Rising, I felt something loosen in the hinges of my chest, as though each breath found new territory. Dawn slipped pink over the treetops, and the porch swing creaked a welcome as I sat to watch day be born. In that hush, I chose a life forward, not in spite of the past, but textured by it, like a quilt, ugly scraps included, warmed by their joining. I decided to keep the house, but repaint every room in hues I picked for myself. To keep Richard's band, but wear it on a chain beside the Vachard I turned into a pendant, reminders that love and caution can share the same pulse. Most of all, I vowed to speak clear and calm whenever silence threatened to rewrite memory. When my granddaughter arrived, camera trembling like a baby sparrow, I let tears run unchecked as I recounted Mama's letter. Richard's smile, the clock that stopped yet still governs my sense of time. The telling scorched, yet each word fell like cleansing rain, and halfway through, I felt her small hand squeeze mine. Not pity, not shock, but solidarity, the passing of a torch lit by hard-won clarity. Finishing, I inhaled the soft scent of paint from newly colored walls, sage in the parlor, sunflower in the hallway, and I realized grief had finally shifted from resident to guest. I told her I chose to live without rehearsing regrets, to love with eyes wide open, to trust again, but audit my own heart. She asked if I forgave Richard. I said forgiveness is a road I may never finish, yet I refused to carry his deed like a badge. She asked if I feared more loss. I answered that loss is guaranteed, but despair is optional, and I had opted out. As the camera clicked off, the kettle whistled, and I heard Mama in that steam. One long, steady note of release. I poured 2 cups, sweetened hers, sipped mine unadorned, and understood at last that the emptiness inside me was not a void, but a clear space waiting for whichever sunrise I let in next. You know, baby, I used to think life was a straight porch rail you could paint once and count on for decades, but the years have shown me it's more like my quilt basket. Patches of light cotton joy stitched right beside corduroy sorrow, and every square matters because the whole won't keep you warm if even one piece is missing. Back when I was 24, I believed goodness came gift-wrapped, easy to spot by a smile or a kind deed. Now, sitting here with my hair the color of late winter clouds, I understand goodness is a seed you plant in your own chest first, and other folks merely water or wither what you've sown. Losing Mama taught me pain can sneak in wearing ordinary shoes, and loving Richard proved comfort can share a pillow with danger, yet neither lesson made love worthless, only clearer. See, trust isn't blind, it's brave. It steps forward knowing the floorboards may groan, and it carries a lantern of questions, not to expose someone in cruelty, but to light the corners where fear likes to set up housekeeping. If I'd asked harder questions sooner, maybe my road would look different. Maybe Mama's letter would rest in her dresser instead of under a yellow rose. But regret is a rocking chair. It gives you something to do and gets you nowhere. What matters is the way a heavy truth can hollow you out just enough for a new light to settle. Grief, when faced, digs the furrow where mercy eventually roots. I learned that forgiving myself was the first sprout, not excusing my blindness, but admitting I was worthy of the same compassion I'd offered strangers in the library aisle. These days, when children at story hour ask why Charlotte the spider had to die, I tell them every web is both home and trap, and our job is to honor what was built without clinging to silk that's finished its purpose. I've seen widows clutch memories till their knuckles pale, believing loyalty means never closing a chapter. I've learned real loyalty is letting the page turn, so the tale keeps breathing. Mama's warning lives under my rosebush now, nourishing roots instead of gnawing at mine, and each bloom reminds me history can be buried without being forgotten. Truth is planted, not hidden. So when you feel that prickle in your spirit, that faint tug saying something doesn't sit right, listen close. Your intuition is older than any love song and kinder too. But once the storm passes, don't you dare build your house on suspicion alone, because fear makes for poor insulation. Fill your walls with laughter, questions, and a little stubborn hope. I can't promise you won't misplace trust again. Hearts are generous creatures, but I can promise the sun keeps showing up, rain still rinse the dust, and you are allowed to search for joy even while carrying scars. Maybe it's time you stopped waiting for perfect certainty before stepping onto your next porch. Sugar. The rail might creak, the paint might peel, but sunrise won't pause its show until you feel ready. Well now, sugar. The cicadas have folded up their choir and the sky's hanging its last silver lantern. Yet here you and I still sit, sharing one porch across 1,000 screens, breathing in the hush that follows a long, rough hymn. I've poured my heart out like sweet tea, and before you slip back into your own evening, I want to lay one more thought at your feet, gentle but weighty as a keepsake stone. After all the ashes and questions and yellow-petaled truths, I've come to see that stories aren't heirlooms meant to gather dust. They're living seeds we pass along so somebody else might harvest courage when the soil under them turns mean. And if this tale has offered you even a whisper of that courage, then my years of carrying it have earned their keep. I look at the mended vase glowing soft on my kitchen shelf, cradling a single honest bloom, and I remember the day Richard first set roses there, red enough to disguise every warning. Sometimes, when the night is very still, I half expect the door to creak and his footsteps to cross the floor exactly 3 beats apart, the way they used to, like a drummer too proud to miss a note. And in that breath, I wonder if somewhere, beyond whatever fence divides the seen from the unseen, he senses the truth has taken root, senses that I finally left space in my chest for light he cannot shadow. People ask whether real love should find its way home no matter how far it strays. And I reckon that's a question only the heart of the listener can finish, so I'll pose it to you plain. Do you believe a love that once burned bright and burned wrong deserves another sunrise, or should certain doors stay latched for good? While you chew on that, let me tell you the plainest wisdom my 6 decades and change have distilled. Heartbreak and hope share a bloodline. You cannot evict one without starving the other, so keep your windows cracked for breeze, but install locks you're willing to use, and when intuition knocks, answer before it has to bang. Don't mistake vigilance for bitterness, though. There's room to scan the horizon and still marvel at fireflies, room to guard your spirit and still pour kindness like honey over waffles. If this story has pressed on a bruise you'd rather ignore, maybe that's the sign it's time to open your own dusty box of letters, to face the sentences you've tiptoed around, because secrets grow fangs in the dark, but shrink to facts under daylight's plain stare. And if you're wondering whether telling costs more than silence, let this old woman assure you, silence collects interest, darling, and the bill never stops. So breathe deep, straighten your spine, and speak your piece while your voice still knows the way out. I'll leave you with this flicker of doubt I carry like a weather charm. Every so often, when the calendar strikes July 9th and a breeze curls under the door, I catch the faintest scent of smoke braided with roses, and part of me imagines Richard, wherever souls sort their reckonings, pausing to count the years he fooled me and the years since, maybe even plucking a bloom he can never set at my table again. Love remembered is not love restored, yet I'd be lying if I said the thought doesn't tremble the tiniest string in my heart. So tell me, friend across the glow, if the one who broke you knocked tomorrow, memory in hand and apology on tongue, would you open the door, crack the window, or draw the curtains tight? Don't leave me guessing. Drop your answer below, and let's see if courage can travel both directions down this little internet porch of ours.